Hello and welcome to today's Lemongrass Live. My name is Jo Derry-Bennett from the Lemongrass marketing team. I'd also like to welcome our discussion leaders from Lemongrass today. We have Tim, Jazz and Andrew. For those of you who haven't joined one of our discussion sessions before, the intention is that it's informative but informal. We also fully encourage engagement through the next 30 minutes or so. We've got a few poll questions that we'll include into the session, but we also encourage you to use the question or the chat panel on your right-hand side or on your control panel. Please type in a question at any stage. We'll try to include as many as we can within the time. If we can't manage to include them, then we'll follow up directly with you afterwards. But for now, let me hand you over to Tim to formally open the discussion. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. I'm Tim Wintrip. Nice to speak to you. Morning, evening, wherever you happen to be. So today's chat, conversation, interactive session is really focusing on, target operating model for, maximum benefit of running SAP in the cloud. So that's what's interactive session, and we've got a good team, and hopefully you guys can ask us some questions and get some dialogue going. So just by means of introduction, I'm Tim Wintrip. I'm the Chief Customer and Sales Officer at Lemongrass, and I'm based in the US, so don't let my accent fool you. Perhaps, Andrew, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Andrew Jurek. I'm from the consulting area of Lemongrass, and I'm looking forward to giving my views on how automation and operating model work.
And one thing Andrew didn't say is that he's based in the UK, so we've got really the accents switched there.
But he's Canadian.
I lead our DevOps practice here in the Americas.
Cool. Right. So this topic, I'll frame up a little bit, and then we can jump into some detail. But Lemongrass, for those that don't know us, we've been moving SAP workloads to the cloud and the public cloud exclusively for over a decade, and we've learned a lot in that time. It takes 10 years to get 10 years experience, right? So we've seen a lot of things, and what we've seen, I guess, more recently is a more renewed focus on what the target state should look like. So people are moving SAP to the cloud for multiple reasons. We've got clients looking primarily to move to cloud so they can be more agile, leverage native, powerful native cloud services. We got clients, very large insurance company looking to really figure out how they can harden their environment and use kind of more of a CI/CD type approach to harden their environment against ransomware by being able to frequently rebuild it. We got clients looking to reduce costs. But what we're seeing of late, and a trend for clients that perhaps have moved already to cloud, typically, either on their own or with a more classic outsourcer, is that they aren't getting the cloud experience they thought they would. A lot of these companies have got like a strong cloud organization. They're using all the kind of cool tools, but SAP stands alone, doing things perhaps in an older-fashioned way. It's the monolith, so to speak. Recent quote we like to use in Lemongrass, we Fortune 100 oil and gas company, sort of CIO, been working with a very large GSI, sort of partially moved to on a hyperscaler cloud, and they just said it doesn't feel very cloudy. They're not getting the agility they wanted. And actually, in fact, they were getting, it was more complicated. Costs were going up as well. They weren't managing it, and it wasn't really they weren't managing it. It was the incumbent outsourcer in question was really managing. If you boil it down, it was managing it the same way that they managed it on-prem. In fact, it was largely the same team, right? And one of the things that we've learned, and we've made mistakes. We're certainly not perfect. Is that you need to think about the operating model differently from the get-go. So I like to say, when I book a vacation, I book it based on where I'm going and when I want to get out of my holiday. A lot of companies tend to focus on the getting to cloud, but they don't think enough about what they're going to get when they get there. They're kind of often they're booking their holiday based on the airline choice as opposed to the hotel they're staying in. So I think we're seeing these challenges out there, and if there's clients that are about to migrate, we've got some advice. And if there's clients that have migrated and they're kind of perhaps not seeing the cloud-like experience, we've obviously got a point of view on that. So, you know, this is discussion. So, you know, Andy, based on what you're seeing with some of the engagements you're running, you know, what are why do you think that some of the clients aren't putting some of these, why are they not putting the kind of an optimum operating model in place to?
Yeah, I think part of it is simply just awareness of how to operate in the cloud. You know, the early adopters, whenever you move to a cloud environment, are typically the developers, and because of how SAP is developed, they typically are kind of in third place for development. So normally the developers will start getting very excited about using all the new tools that you get in cloud. The infrastructure folks are usually second in terms of they start to really see the benefit of some of the automation, and they start to begin to leverage some of the offerings that the cloud providers have. In SAP, I guess because it's more rooted in a prescriptive method of how things are done, a little bit like sort of mainframe, they tend to lag a little bit behind, right? When you think of an analogy, if you look at back 10 years ago or so, when virtualization first sort of came to the SAP world, again, there was a lot of resistance from not only SAP, but people within that space, and they still tended to treat everything as if it was physical, and it took a little bit of time to be able to have that. I think how to get people to change, it's really looking at the automation opportunities, and Jazz has a lot more experience and he'll talk about that, but that's the hook, or that's the real motivator in terms of getting SAP operations to embrace some of these things within cloud. That's what's in it for them.
Okay, cool. Jazz, do you want to jump into some of that automation?
Yeah, I think so.
Some of the tenets that you might say.
Sure. So the number one thing I'll see is, you know, different customers is usually they're struggling to say, you know, why is SAP on an island? Why do I have to treat it different? Why, you know, like, tell me why I don't. So, you know, there's certain things that we can't change about SAP. Like SAP doesn't run in containers, at least the main products that we all run. Things like HANA instances don't really run supported in containers. So what we try to do at customers is say, okay, you've got a certain service that you want to automate, right? So we try to approach it from a service standpoint. And we say things like, okay, if you want to enable your developers to do, you know, multi-object, different version developments in SAP, right? How might we look at like how we can take that from one standpoint of, you know, I consider, you know, a customer that's, you know, got multiple facets of development happen at the same time. How can we use cloud infrastructure to help enable that, right? And so that comes with things like being able to spin up infrastructure on the fly, and being able to configure infrastructure, use backups on the fly, all of the infrastructure pieces that used to take us weeks to kind of go through a procurement process and all of that. It's different in the cloud, right? So if you're moving to cloud, you can't just take those same old models with you. You really got to challenge how you think. So one of the things that we're doing to customers is near zero downtime patching for kind of anything below the SAP application layer. So a lot of SAP folks will say, NCGT, I know that terminology, that's SAP you know, specific. Not really, right? So things like patching a HANA database shouldn't require any downtime, right? Those are things like, you know, even patching OSs. Like if we think about, you know, there's usually one piece of that product that requires the downtime, but does it mean that I need to take 4, 6, 8, 10, 12-hour outage windows to do that? So really we're trying to surround these old monolithic systems with native cloud technology and kind of the new way of operating, if you will, right? And eliminate that planned downtime. Businesses always target, you know, unplanned downtime. We're saying, why don't you target planned downtime as part of your new operating model, right? Get rid of the monthly things, right? And then another thing I'll say that like typically isn't done until a bit later is you'll have these companies that start to look at, okay, well, I'm using, maybe I'm using for this certain hypervisor, I'm using this certain infrastructure as code tool set, I'm using this tool set over here. And really what we try to do is say, hey, when you're evaluating this, you need to kind of identify your best of breed tools. Don't try to have this kind of IP spread that's over a huge different type of landscape, right? Really focus on best of breed tools. You can work with a partner to figure that out. You can look at evaluate functionality as it comes out in the marketplace. You know, face it, we're in IT now. You run tool sets to help you accomplish your day-to-day activity, right? But I think about, you know, Andrew, I think I pass it back to you. You know, like what are some things that you would look at for, you know, maybe this new target operating model?
Yeah, so I guess we can break it down into several areas. One of the initial parts is looking at how to get your basis team to better interact with the traditional infrastructure team, right? So a lot of the tasks that we see when we go and take a look at an end-to-end review of a process, for example, like let's say it's a system copy. Often there will be lots of handoff points where the basis team will say, "Oh, well, I go and request this from the cloud team, and then I wait a certain period of time, and then I get something back, and then I have to go to the security team, et cetera, et cetera." And that's not necessarily the best way of doing things, right? Those controls and things like that, all of those controls and guardrails can be put in place so that it's much more of an experience that the basis team is in charge of, right? And that's how you're able to go and shrink down some of the simple repetitive tasks that you would have as a basis team. The second area to look at is adding value to things which are really only possible in cloud. So one of the big changes is in how cloud is accounted for. So when you take a look at cloud costing, the way in which costs are now able to be allocated and the influence that individuals have at a very different level. So previously, you would have the finance department involved for large purchases of capital infrastructure. Now those decisions are being taken at a much lower level, where you can have the ability to go and spin up infrastructure. So making changes to not only what the process flow for approval is, but also to be able to change and handle things from things that are really specific to cloud.
Yeah, I think Andrew, there's a couple of benefits there. Obviously, it sounds obvious, but typically in clients there's a great cloud team, right? And there's a great basis team, or or an architecture team around basis if they've outsourced, and the two teams just don't talk enough, right? So really proactively thinking about what that operating structure needs to be. So Andrew and I are working on a large global telecoms manufacturer at the moment, and they have a very kind of relatively complicated structure with employees, multiple outsourced parties, and a desire to do more themselves and take control. So what we're working with them there is we're building a sort of pseudo SRE, site reliability engineering kind of function, right? Which seems a bit different, but we're organizing that by service, and we're populating that team with a mixture of some of our folks, some of their partner folks, and obviously the client's key staff members to really, and there's a couple of other benefits of that which are sort of maybe tertiary. I think they're probably really important actually, is it really motivates the teams, because the cloud teams feel like they're influencing this key critical system, and the SAP teams, the basis guys, are learning new skill sets, right? So they're getting excited about the tech, and there's a cross-pollination, which means to happier employees, and potentially it's a way you can attract talent, because maybe SAP is not as sexy as it was, but if you kind of start munging in Terraform and cool technologies, you're going to get potentially sort of that cross-pollination. And it's something that we've done internally, because when we started this many years ago, we were a little bit we had our infrastructure team and our basis team. What
we used to launch things in the console still. when everything was first started.
You love it, Jazz. You love it, Jazz.
Yeah.
That kind of coming together of the teams has meant that we can really kind of organize our folks more efficiently. And actually, it's a lot about, employee satisfaction in that instance. So something to really consider as a byproduct of this better way of doing things, I think, my opinion anyway.
Maybe I could step in with a few related questions actually, because we've got quite a few. And interestingly, the first question is actually that this organisation has already outsourced to an SI, so they're already working in a multi-partner environment, and they also already have someone looking after their cloud environment. What are the kind of key points or some of the recommendations you'd say, or maybe some key best practices that maybe they should be aspiring for managing that cloud environment with their partner?
I'll jump in. Yeah, I'll take it. So I would say the number one thing is if you're not having a continuous improvement cycle, right? That's one thing that a lot of times we see it. You have a SI which you're happy with, maybe they're a good partner, all that good stuff. But if you're not constantly reevaluating yourself, and not just through something like a monthly service review or quarterly service review, if you're not actually taking the time to step back and say, okay, we need to hit this business value driver. How do we do that, right? And usually that has to be done within the confines of a project or a POC. That's how you accelerate innovation within your company, right? If you have, and I would say just having a good technical architect within your organization, right? Or a really good solutions architect, words kind of interchangeable there, but those folks should be focused on things that are very cloud related, like FinOps, DevOps. That terminology should kind of be spread throughout the organization. So when you go to someone and you ask, okay, our FinOps practices, can you show us what those look like? Let's look at our spend. Do we have any wastage, right? And another thing with DevOps is 100% of DevOps relies on automation, as well as it does is getting rid of silos. So if you have silos in your organization, there's probably a chance that you don't have DevOps embedded there already, right? So really treating it as kind of like a project and like a self-assessment is what we like to call it, is a great way to kind of cover that with your current partner. Right?
And one thing we do, just as Lemongrass, just to butt in there, is we're very we do it regularly. We come in and do some kind of cursory assessment to point out a few of these things, because typically, and by the way, some of these partners are really good, but they're inheriting an existing contract. They may, if it's an outsourcer, they may have a legacy team that they need to redeploy in this new cloud stuff. So one, we can point out some things that need to get done. So that example of the telecoms manufacturer I gave you, that is in us helping the partner get more capable, right? So I'd say be demanding as well, right? If you've got SLAs that you've had on SAP for a long time, they can be better, right? So I know contracts can be difficult. You've got to find the right point in time, but there's normally an inception point, and that continuous improvement piece that Jazz is talking about. Go be demanding, because you may be talking to the wrong person in your partner. They may be staffing your project with with people that aren't necessarily as cloud aware as they could be, right? Would point. Andy, did anything I missed there or?
Yeah, it's the types of things that you need from your partner actually do change as a result of moving to cloud. So yes, you'll still have your typical SLAs, but usually the partner is now less in charge of that. So those SLAs actually fall more to your hyperscaler. So now you're going to need something slightly. You need your partner to work differently with you and that hyperscaler, right? Where they can add value is different to where it was found previously. And yes, a collaborative approach is great with an SI if they want to work towards reducing technical debt. When we go and speak to some of the SIs, sometimes they're very happy and they say, look at how many of these things we've done for the client, right? In terms of service requests that we've done for the client. And that shouldn't be the measure. The measure should be how many of those service requests have you automated this year, right? So it's a change in focus that you need the SI to step up to, and yeah, just be assertive with the SI and say, this is what I want you to do
I think that's a trajectory principle, right? You know, making yourself measurable. You know, how many hours do I spend on patching a month, a year? You know, how many hours do I spend answering the same ticket over and over again? I mean, like just going through yourself and making that's how that operating model starts to change, right? It's evaluating yourself. I mean, and that's true, like DevOps, that's already to the core, right? You said you had some more questions, Jeff?
I do, but it's actually, you're kind of leading you to my next one. That's quite a good one, actually. See, Jazz and all of us at Lemongrass talk about the journey. So this is a long-term approach. This isn't a quick fix. And actually, one of the things is it requires change, and that change can differ from client to client. But this question is, what are some of the considerations, and how do Lemongrass maybe give some examples of how you work with clients to help them through that change?
Yeah, let's talk. Why don't we, Jazz? Why don't you talk about how we got started with the, Fortune 100, technology manufacturer. Where that started, and then how it transformed.
Yeah. So we originally did a migration piece for this particular customer, and then they moved to a larger SI to kind of do the day-to-day operations bit. What quickly happened, and at Lemongrass we have a little different way of doing this, so I'll describe the situation and say, hey, here's what I would do. They moved to a large SI, and then all of a sudden, like, things just started to fail. They were having some outages, so technical debt is starting to increase. They're having some outages that are based upon this. And then the other thing, which is almost as concerning as outages, is the FinOps practice was non-existent, right? And so, we were able to go in and do an assessment just upon the FinOps, and really that kind of burgeoned into like this larger, operating model that we're doing at this customer today. But it really started with coming in and doing like a specific piece of work, right? And then all of a sudden, that turns into, okay, well, if I'm not thinking about FinOps, what else am I not thinking about? Because I'm in cloud now, and I never had to worry about like instances and networks. So you need a partner that really understands that, how SAP fits on the cloud, because it is not same. And if you're using the model for same, there's going to be things that creep up that you're going to learn about after the fact that are usually really expensive for organizations. That's why at Lemongrass, we typically try to make that migration project. That's a very poignant and small piece of work we do. The other piece of work that we do is actually an onboarding project, right? We want to make sure that we set up success for day 2 going forward forever, right? You migrate one day. I like to say this, it's kind of catchy, but you migrate one day and you operate every day, right? So think about how you operate every day and build that into your designs.
Exactly. And one thing we do from the get-go, I know Andrew's working on a program right now, but one of the things I normally say is, what does the service catalog look like?
Yeah,
all of the services, and most of the time there isn't really one. And how many of those SOPs that you have that underpin the catalog are automated? So what we'll do is come in and start looking at what that catalog looks like, and a lot of the times there isn't one. And a lot of the times, even with an outsourcer in place, I was quite shocked recently actually, where there was a big outsourcer, and the client asked us to help and look at the SOPs, and we got like my kids' homework if they'd written on the way to school on the bus. It was very kind of put all together. So I would definitely we can come in, or you should say, what's your cloud and SAP service catalog look like? Do you have one? And how many of the underpinning functions of that are automated, which links that measurability that Jazz and actually it was Andrew, sorry, to give Andrew credit, Andrew was talking about. Andrew, anything?
Yeah, the SOPs are funny because they'll say, oh yes, we have all the SOPs, and when you start digging into it, they're obviously not written for cloud at all. So the tooling, for example, that gets put in when cloud goes in is very different. How you go and request things, usually the backup system has changed, and sometimes when you go through these things, they're so focused on the migration and they haven't actually thought about how the operation happens. And they're like, yay, the operation, the migrations is a success, and then they're really struggling to even get back to the original level for being able to make some of these changes.
Yeah, that's I guess one of the key takeaways is think about the operational model at the beginning. you know, we were foul to it, I guess, more in our infancy, and you know, perhaps SaaS sometimes, where we focus all on the migration. And I know the cloud providers, you know, love them, we work with them, but they're all measured on driving that consumption to cloud. So it's all about the migration, but actually it should be all about how it's going to run afterwards. So hopefully semi-answered that question, Joe.
Yep, well, it was all encompassing for sure. I'm going to try and fit in 2 last questions and combine them into one, because I know we're nearly on the end of our time. So we have spoken about tooling. So one of the aspects is, and I think Andrew just mentioned it, cloud tooling is quite different from what you're used to. But I'm going to combine it with, are you seeing more COEs rather, cloud COEs, to help with the governance, not just of SAP in the cloud, but of whole enterprises in the cloud? Don't know who wants to take that last major question.
I can take the tooling part, right? And then I guess it'll evolve into something else. So yeah, when it comes to tooling, you know, we kind of mentioned best of breed tooling, right? So Terraform, Ansible, Jenkins, Azure DevOps, whatever your flavor is. I would say try to stick with kind of one view of what that looks like over the organization and how it has multiple facets into different verticals, whether or not it's your web applications that you run, your enterprise applications, and then your, you know, SAP applications. They run a different, you know, they run a slice of that tool set. You know, they spin up EC2 or VMs using Terraform, but you also got your group that does more traditional cloud operations, and they use Terraform to do containers and Kubernetes, right? So stick with the best of breed of tooling, try to figure out what that is. And then the other thing I would say is, especially in the SAP space, SAP has some really great tools that, you know, if you're working with a partner, that they can help augment that with, right? So SAP has great tools like post-copy automation, right? No one can tell SAP how to do post-copy automation better than SAP, right? So really making sure that the tools that you use can be extensible into things like that. And then as far as like an overarching organizational standpoint, I would really say that, you know, depending on the customer, sometimes it's the cloud ops folks that are making these first kind of forays into, you know, what this new operating model looks like and what tooling that they're using to do that operating model. But I will say that, like, the COEs and some of the larger companies that we're in, they're leading that charge. You know, they have a monolithic application known as SAP, and they're actually leading that charge within the company of using, you know, things like removing unplanned downtime to a minimal amount, right? I don't know if Andrew, if you have anything.
Yeah, the SOE can play a leading role in some of these things. From a governance perspective, a lot of people think that SAP is kind of special in some fashion, and it shouldn't be. It absolutely should not be special in any shape or form from a governance perspective. Yes, they have some very specific tooling. Yes, there's some rules around how, you know, what the various configurations of SAP can look like. But from a pure play governance perspective, and you know, we have seen this in clients where it is actually the COE that goes back and says, look, we want to go and simplify how all of these things are done, and that's what drives as opposed to the traditional long chain of approvals, more into this guardrail style of process, and that can be applied to things outside of SAP. And if a customer already has that set up, then SAP needs, you know, the basis team of the COE needs to go and adopt those practices to try to go and harmonize that as much as possible.
Cool.
Okay, I best hand back to Tim to wrap up. Time is nearly up, I'm afraid. Thanks for that.
Yeah, so guys, really appreciate you giving us the time, and of course follow up with any questions. We're obviously really keen to engage and work with everybody, and we can do lots of follow up. So I'd say, you know, key takeaways from this is, you know, we've said it several times actually, but think about the destination up front, think about the operating model, spend the time to try and build that into any kind of migration plans you have. And if you have an incumbent already managing your environment on cloud, go be demanding. You know, you can continuously improve. And I think, you know, as Andy and the team have said, you know, you've got great cloud teams, typically great SAP teams that coming together, and there's different ways you can kind of merge together. But, you know, that is a great opportunity, right, for enhancement for all involved. You know, and that's really going to also help with, you know, keeping your staff happy and developing them and all that sort of business. So I would say, you know, Lemongrass is here. We've got a bit of experience in this space, as I hope you heard. And you know, we definitely do kind of a lot of work, you know, kind of as an investment, if you like, to come and look at these things and make observations. You know, it's not some sort of heavy engagement, but we can come and have a cursory look if there's things that could be improved. So I think that's my words consumed. 1 minute over, Joe.
That's okay. So thank you everyone for joining today. Thanks to Tim, Jazz and Andrew for your insights, for your words of wisdom there. I'm really sorry we didn't get a chance to answer all of the questions. So anyone we didn't include or any question we didn't include, we'll follow up with you in the next few days via email and look at how we can provide a response to you. I will also be providing a link to this recording via email. It will have the contact details for Tim, Jazz and Andrew. But also, if you're traveling to Sapphire in the next few weeks, please do feel free to reach out to them directly. They'll be there. There will be Lemongrass customers there. Feel free to come and hear firsthand just what some of these customers have experienced and also the journey that they're on. So just want to say thank you again and wish you a great rest of the day. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you.